1,000 subscribers. What the hoosh could I do to celebrate? Well, does anyone remember Beano number 1? Well, today we have an important question to answer. What is inside Beano number 1? We all know about the famous cover with the big pigeon and the crocagator. And of course the title mascot Peanuts, who was never there. Never ever there. It's the Mandela effect. You're lying to yourself if you say he was there. He never was, you never saw him. Let's move on. Hi everybody, it's me, your old pal Ashley, and get cozy because we are delving in deep to Beano number 1. And doing something that has never ever been done before, actually looking inside this ancient relic of the past and saying a thing or two about a thing or two. I happen to have 3 versions of the comic, a complete replica, a history book containing each page, and a cleaned up version as well, so I'll cover any differences I notice as we run through it, and maybe even some scandalous fake history. Interesting. Now boys, and hopefully some girls, I know there's at least one of your kind who watches, you know who you are. Let's get to work. Part 1. The Beano number 1. In my video, The Birth of the Beano, I covered some of the early years of DC Thompson and their Big 5 adventure comics. These were more magazine-esque than actual comics and featured thrilling text stories, illustrated stories, and even a few funny and zany strips here and there, which were a big hit. All this got R.D. Lowe, the managing editor of the comic, thinking, what if more of that? Plans soon got underway for a new Big 5 focusing on more light-hearted affairs. The first one being no one's favourite, the Dandy, but it paved the way for everyone's favourite, the Beano. We later got a third one no one recalls called Magic, but abracadabra, it just disappeared. The start of the Second World War also put an end to the other comics being planned for a new Big 5. R.D. Lowe, which, side note, gangster name, also had seen the success of 2 comic strips, Our Wooly and The Bruins, which, according to the book, The Unofficial History of the Beano, further encouraged him to push for new funny books based around humor. A lot depended on how well the Dandy would do, and luckily for the Beano, it was an instant hit. The Dandy sold over 440,000 copies, far more than even the most popular member of the other Big 5. More like the Big Bad Seller 5, am I right? Lowe, now feeling very high, was full steam ahead. Choo choo! He picked a then only 24-year-old George Mooney as editor for the coming Beano. George had worked on publications such as Hotspur as sub-editor and The Wizard after beginning his career working on The Rover. So despite his young age, he had an already stellar CV. A team was assembled and they set about writing scripts and fine-tuning art. They weren't planning on recreating the wheel and decided to follow the Dandy formula, which was a mixture of humor strips, text stories, and even a few adventure strips. This gives it a real sense of variety. We aren't in the everyone is a brat child and just wears red and black era just yet, though there is a person wearing black and red stripes who is a brat, so we'll get to him later. R.D. Lowe travelled about here and sometimes there to discover new talents, such as Reg Carter. Lowe believed part of the Dandy success was the black and white character Corky the Cat popping on the colour cover, and was eager to replicate this idea with a strip titled Oswald the Ostrich. Very catchy. Hopefully they don't rename it. It was Carter's job to bring this strip to life. Other notable talent included Basil Blackaller, who was only 16 years old at the time and luckily wasn't confined by silly child labour laws. Unfortunately, he was blocked from a full-time commitment by his loving mother, so he worked on a freelance basis instead of moving to Dundee to be full-time. Mothers, am I right? There was also Hugh McNeil, who worked on Ping, a stretchy character decades before Mr. Fantastic. We would all be more familiar with Hugh's other, more famous character, the original girl boss, Pansy Potter. There was already a rich established creative team from DC Thompson ready to work on the comic as well, but the most notable and legendary was Dudley D Watkins, who frankly sounds as if his name was a comic itself. Double DW had made a name for himself working on the previously mentioned Bruins and Our Woolly. If you want to launch a new comic, the best way for it to be successful was to have Double DW make the real star of the comic for the first few decades, and that he did. This big gun gave us none other than our Lord and Savior, the blue-blooded Marmaduke Lord Snooty, Lord of Bunkerton. If you think that this man's resume isn't already impressive enough, we can also thank him for the Pie Man Desperate Dan. Double DW was a superstar. Well, I think that's enough foreplay. Let's dig into the Beano #1. Part 2, the Beano cover. I have two print versions of the Beano #1. The first was the replica from the 80th anniversary box set. This reprint of Beano #1 is generally very good and sharp. You are probably wondering, however, though, where is the weird racist minstrel character Peanut? Well, it was never there. It's Mandela effect. There was never a culturally inappropriate character that DC Thompson would rather you forget ever existed. No sirree Bob. The Hadron Collider was turned on and some other reality got that, not ours. Phew, close call there. Anyways, I do have a replica of that version of the Beano, which includes Peanut on the cover. No dancing around it. I'm sure some weirdos will say it's not offensive and this and that, but it is, and we shouldn't pretend it didn't happen and sweep it under the rug. I've mentioned it now, and I'll point out any other questionable or regrettable things that may have been removed or in some cases more nefariously changed. Oh, ominous. Looking at the rest of this iconic cover, we can see the thankfully renamed Oswald the Ostrich to Big Ego. You know him, you love him, you know what he's about. Let's focus on something I haven't talked about before in much depth. The free gift. Beano #1 came with a whoopee mask, and look, I have a replica. This is terrible. Seriously, it's not even that like they didn't try. It seems like they went out of their way to get it as wrong as possible. Here is how it's meant to look, and here is what I got. There is speculation that the whoopee mask came in a variety of colors, but we'll never know as only one seems to still exist. Let's quickly talk now about the size for a moment. How big was Beano #1? I have had mixed reports, and those reports were made by me, if you could imagine. The portfolio facsimile edition says it's reprinted to scale, but maybe it just means it's proportionally the same in A5. I don't know, this has confused me for a while. I think the A4 is the correct size. Speaking of confusing, issue 1 is dated July 30th, 1938, but arrived in stores July 26th. I'm sure there are logistical reasons for this and it doesn't actually matter, but it's my non-paying job duty to point it out. Now let's turn the page and see what awaits us inside. Part 3, the first pages. As mentioned in my Birth of the Beano video, the first page comics are very much modeled on the American style funnies, particularly brave Captain Kipper. In this comic we get a rhyme. That's cute. Expect more rhyming, by the way. The late 30s lost their minds for rhymes. Captain Kipper thinks he is taking a rest on a little island, but the rhyme soon informs us he is mistaken. The whale blows him up and spins him right round, baby, right round. How delightful! A classic British strip. All's well that ends well, except, well, let's read the rhyme. Our Captain Bold deserves a cheer, he's killed the monster with his spear. So, hooray! He straight up butchers that whale. Fantastic! Next week, Kipper meets some seals. Oh jeez. I don't want to imagine what he will do to our banana posing friends. At least we get a free packet of sugar button sweets. If you think this story seems a little not very British, you were right. It was made by one of those Torelli brothers whose work would be posted from Italy. Allora, now that we got that upsetting story out of the way, let's go back to the top and read all about Ping the Elastic Man. He is boasting about his powers. I don't know why, but I find panel 2 very funny. Just his smug, satisfied stance as we see a mob watching him from a slight distance. Anywho, he pays for his pride as all these people invade his personal space and inappropriately touch, pull, and stretch him. He doesn't look too well in the final panel, but has clearly learned his lesson. A great start to this character, 9 out of 10, would read again. Next up is Lord Snooty, Earl of Bunkerton. Again, I have talked about this one in my Birth of the Beano video. Lord Snooty and his pals are in the all-important page 3, the first page you see when opening the comic. So, if the cover intrigued you enough to peek inside, Lord Snooty's job was to finish the sale. In this comic, he sneaks out on his birthday to pal around with his pals. Beautiful artwork by Dudley D. He would draw all the Bunkerton Castle characters with this uptight posh prick face, while the Beaver kids of Ashcan Alley were more friendly and expressive looking. The readers were common muck like me, so the idea was we would relate to this ragtag group and their goat. Speaking of goats, part 4, Morgyn the Mighty. If that Italian Kipper killing sea life wasn't enough bloodlust for you, well, you're in luck as we get an action strip next, Morgyn the Mighty. Watch as he beats up an eagle for attacking his goat, who is no relation to the Beaver kid's goat. The struggle leads to Morgyn stabbing the majestic bird in the chest, and with its final energy, the eagle crashes Morgyn into the ocean, where he comes face to face with a deadly tiger shark. Morgyn mightily wrestles the shark to take him to the surface, where he repays it by stabbing it repeatedly in its head. The brute drags the now lifeless creature to shore to be harvested for skin and food. The strongman had won the battle of the air and sea, yet all that was on his mind was mending his goat's pen. You do not mess with Morgyn's goat, or you will really annoy him. In fact, that's where the common expression, "get on my goat," comes from. Looking at his design, what comes immediately to mind is Tarzan, who was very popular around this time, and this is clearly taking some strong inspiration. It won't be the only Tarzan-inspired thing we see in Beano number 1 either. Morgyn would continue in this double-page format for a 14-week run. The character had actually originated in The Rover as text stories from 1928, and this illustrated stint in the Beano would be reprinted back to The Rover in 1954. Say what you will about Morgyn, the illustrations were beautiful and action-packed. Speaking of packed, his muscles were awesome. Oh, matron. Everybody loves big muscles. Next we have maybe my least favorite fictional character, Tom Bloody Thumb. I'm sure there have been a good adaptation somewhere of Tom Thumbelina, but I've not found it. Maybe this is the one, but spoiler alert, it's not. It's still Tom Thumb, more like Tom Dumb. Am I right, fellas? And that one lady who watches? Anyways, let's see what the 6-inch boy gets up to. Which, by the way, 6 inches, bit much, isn't it? Little excessive. 4, I think we can all agree, is more than enough. Am I right, that one lady who watches? And the fellas? These text stories were the bread and butter of the Big Five, tried and tested. The illustrated heading was done by Double DW. Dudley, man, he was something else. A lot of artists would struggle with the scale difference of the characters, but not our Double DW. The story is fine. Honestly, the only thing I really enjoyed reading was the preview for next week's story. Tom Thumb in a fight with a great big rat. Why would you not start with that? Maybe he ends up befriending the rat and naming him Ben. If anyone got that reference, you may be dorkier than me, and the two of us need look no more. Part 5, Black Flash the Beaver. Oh my goodness, more reading. Do you think I've nothing better to be doing than... wait. Where is Black Flash the Beaver? Apparently I don't have to read it. Hooray! Except I have it here. Look at these white pages. Just not as cute as the aged paper look. These stories would be written as one long story, and the sub-editors would divide them into episodes. In this opening episode, we have beavers working and playing at the dam, having a jolly good time until Brotail, the father of Black Flash, sniffed danger in the air. All the beavers hide in the dam as we see why this story was removed. An Indian holding a rifle and wearing an ugly scowl was up to no good. Maybe this dangerous Native American is Little Plum. We all know how much of a problem he is. Black Flash, who had been playing, hadn't noticed the danger, but then there was a shot. Little Plum. Okay. Running Coyote is his name, and he shot his gun at Brotail, who had come to try and save his son Black Flash. Luckily, his shot missed. Phew! Running Coyote then sees Black Flash now, and noticing his hide is more exotic than your average gray beaver, he chases him into the woods before giving up in case the warden would catch him for poaching. Little did he know the warden was busy capturing Wild Boy. There's a reference you will not understand until later, so keep watching, and while you're at it, remember to also like and subscribe. Go on, you know you want to. Black Flash managed to escape but was now lost. He wanders around a bit and meets a porcupine who has just no time for him whatsoever. Flash keeps going and happens upon another beaver colony and attempts to play with the other baby beavers, but things get very unpleasant for him very quickly. The other beavers don't like this black beaver, and after initially being afraid decide to beat him up real bad, but Black Flash don't back down from no one. Anyways, the minute a bigger beaver pops up, Black Flash backed down and whimpered off. He hides behind some lady beaver nearby. Luckily for Black Flash, this was his attacker's wife, and being a classic wife, this beaver slapped her husband silly, like really mauled into him, protecting our pathetic hero. The mama beaver then adopts Flash, who I guess just immediately accepts his new life and goes back to splashing about. Next week we are teased that Black Flash will square off against an angry rattlesnake. This was alright, I mean, if you like reading. It's nice and descriptive, but we have lovely television now, so why would you read this other than to make a YouTube video talking about it? Part 6, Whoopie Hank, Cracker Jack, and Hookys' Magic Bowler Hat. Surprisingly, the early days of the Beano had more adult characters than its big brother, the Dandy did. Here we get Whoopie Hank, the slapdash sheriff, who I don't think is associated with the Whoopie mask re-gift. He doesn't wear a mask, nor does any villain he faces in this comic. It's strange, but I digress. With a star on his shirt and slugs in his gun, laugh at the sheriff, he's chock full of fun. Here Hank is fooled into holding a door closed by a bank robber. It really reminds me of a scene from one of the Pink Panther movies. When he finally realizes he's a big idiot, he dashes off on his horse to make amends. He runs up a hill to a cannon and fires nails on a road he assumes the robber must be using, thus bursting the fiend's tires. We get a class British comic one-liner. Very good. Underneath each panel we also get the story told in rhyme. I told you, rhyming was very big in the 30s. Whoopie was a bit of fun, maybe my favorite in issue 1 so far. It's between him and Snooty. It has a look that is similar to newspaper comic strips, very simple, but it's very appealing. Drawn by Roland Davis, who had worked on a Sunday Express strip called Come On Steve. Roland was exclusive to the Beano, whereas most of the artists would also work on the Dandy. Whoopie Hank would only appear in the Beano for a year before riding off into the sunset, which was a shame. We have Cracker Jack, the Wonder Whipman next, and a very big difference in art styles. It is nice to have so much variety. I can only imagine how fun this comic must have felt at the time when they didn't have television or even any soap. Those poor filthy British urchins. So Cracker Jack was a performer, I guess. He does some tricks with his whips and then he uses his very select skills to stop mobsters and stuff. Like here, where he uses his whip while riding a horse to twist the bad guy's car steering wheel, which causes a crash. Thank God that mobster car had no roof. My favorite part of this page was the advertisement for delicious sweets in Beano number 2. I would though be amiss if I didn't mention that Cracker Jack is inexplicably missing from the reprint. Why? I don't know. I mean I do know why, but I don't want to say why, but I think I have to. His horse had a very, very unfortunate name, and by unfortunate I mean a very, very racist name. Like, really bad. It puts the name Cracker into a real specific context, and the fact he is so good with a whip really shows the name is not a coincidence and is disgusting. In the History of the Beano book, they do a little whitewashing. They don't mention the real name of the horse, but have an edited text to say, Nugget, the black horse, and not what it really was. It's a little bit George Orwellian from 1984. The facsimile I have is the only reason I know the real name, and their later reprinted comic removing the pages altogether confirms it. It's strange how they felt fine editing the real name in a history book without any mention, but couldn't use the edited text in a later reprint. I'm fine with them changing the text, but if it's in a history book, at least mention you did the change. Don't pretend it was always and ever called Nugget. That's not cool. I think we should move on. It's Hookys' Magic Bowler Hat time, and I'm sure there can't be any more weird, bygone racist undertones in this one. Now let me read the top line to confirm that we have nothing to worry about with this comic. A mystic man from Magic Land, the slave obeys the boy's command. So, a story about owning a magic slave. Okay, let's hope the names don't get weird on us at least. So the slave in question is a genie called Mika of the magic bowler hat. Hooky is a nice boy who happily invites an old man to have food with him. The man then gives him the magic bowler hat in gratitude. Nothing really happens in the comic after he gets his genie. He uses a weird idiom I've never heard of and turns pink for a bit, but then the genie gives Hooky some spiky armor to protect him from a bull. Hooky is a real aw shucks kind of fella, and the genie seems happy in his job. Well, as the logline told us, it's not a job by choice. There would be a similar magic kind of strip later on called Jimmy and the Magic Patch, drawn by our fave Dudley D W. This strip had a lot less slaves and had a lot more personality than our friend Hooky. Part 7, The Wrangles of Granny Green. So, I was excited for this one when I first mentioned it in Birth of the Beano, but I hadn't realized it was a cross-dressing story. I was expecting some very boring story about a nature-loving granny. This is all about a male dressing up as a woman. If you would allow me a little side tangent, for some reason people of a certain age in Ireland and also Old Blighty find men dressing up as frumpy or voluptuous women just the most hysterical thing in the world. I can imagine this Granny Green was a real hit, with all of us repressed Irish and British men getting to live our cross-dressing fantasies vicariously through the character in the story. In The Wrangles of Granny Green, an 11-year-old Jimmy Green dresses up as his own grandma to outwit his enemies and terrorize the general population. Jimmy particularly liked pelting tomatoes at people, as you can see from the illustration. In this issue, he tricks a boy called Sneaky and his pals. I guess it's kind of like Bad Grandpa or one of those shows where they use makeup to look like old people and do outrageous things. The story is actually very dark. Sneaky is a psychopath who likes the idea of tormenting an old granny. Of course, it will be Jimmy who will be the one who does the actual torturing. Things escalate when a dangerous bully, Captain Moffat, appears with his vicious dog. Granny Green, using a pear to hit him in the head, tricks him into thinking it was Sneaky and his pals. Moffat doesn't give chase, but instead lets his violent dog do the running, who disappears after the boys, and though we don't see it, certainly mauls them all to death. Jimmy Green is very pleased with his work today, having rid himself of one of his greatest enemies. I wonder what other people he has dispatched away with as this devilish Granny Green. I was expecting a boring joke story, but this was actually very entertaining. I'm a big fan of Granny Green. Part 8, the comic strip alliteration. If your comic doesn't have alliteration in the title, is it even a comic? No, is the answer. Let's see what these next 6 comics have in store for us. First is Wee Peem, he's a proper scream. Very Dennis the Menace off the bat with his black and red striped top. He pretends to be smoking a cigar, and when he is told to throw it away at once, he does so, only for it to explode. A nearby constable goes to see if he has any more of them in his box, only to be revealed as another ruse, as the constable is hissed straight in the face. I can't imagine Dennis trying any menacing this good from the 90s on. Little Dead-Eye Dick, he's a fun man and a gunman. So in this story, our friend Dead-Eye Dick saves a man's hat by, shooting it. Cool, must be American. I like the panel where his head just disappears. That was nice. Moving on. Now it's Hairy Dan time as we learn how Dan won the race with his hairy face. The art is a bit confusing, but I guess a gust of wind breaks his sail, so he uses his beard to win the trophy. Good. Good for you, Dan. Great job. Moving on to the next page, we have Contrary Mary, who is a moke. Apparently a moke is a donkey that is old or in poor condition. We see one of those British Royal Guards chasing a goat that is the battalion's mascot. The guard is down in the dumps when he is unable to catch up, and we learn there is an inspection tomorrow. Overhearing the bloke's conundrum, Contrary Mary decides to help by dressing up as the goat and saving the day. To be honest, I'm a bit disappointed, as this was not a very contrary donkey at all, like not even a little bit contrary. More like the delightful donkey. Delightful Mary is what it should have been called, because she is an absolute treat. Maybe Smiler the Sweeper will be less disappointing. Smiler is a clever whiz for catching bees, and he catches some bees. He then brings them to a bee farm, so good on him for not killing them. After what we've read so far in this issue, the first thing you would expect is for him to just squash them, but no, he brings them to safety. Bees are very important. This comic had a good message, so good job, Beano. And finally, we have Helpful Henry, which apparently is just too bad for Henry's dad. The premise is Henry wants to help, but he's a complete wally. He steals some paving stones. The comic then ends with his dad being arrested. Henry!
Henry! Henry behave! Sorry, Mother! You naughty boy, I've told you time and time again.
These 6 comic strips were written by young staff writers and 6 different artists. Nice seeing the variety of all of them together. This is something I wish that the modern Beano would do. Get some young or inexperienced artists in and dedicate 2 pages to new stories and see who stands out. Maybe they do that, who knows. I don't read modern Beanos, I just like to complain about them for not being exactly the same as they were when I read them as a children. The Gaul. Part 9, more reading and Big Fat Joe. The Wishing Tree is next. I'll be honest, the title does not fill me with any excitement. This one was apparently very popular though and got a sequel in 1939 called Acorns Off the Wishing Tree, where having an acorn would grant a wish. The sequel apparently didn't get to end though due to the war causing a paper shortage and it being cut from the Beano, so I guess no point really in me reading this if I never find out the full ending. Oh darn, guess I better move on to Big Fat Joe. Drawn by Alan Morley, Big Fat Joe is the most British looking strip so far. It looks very modern to me, and by modern, I mean the 90s, which was decades ago. Big Fat Joe only lasted 9 months, but you might recognize him as one of Lord Snooty's pals that lives with him in the Castle Bunkerton. In this comic, Big Fat Joe gets revenge on a very nosy Parker looking character who is hilarious. Check this guy out. He's throwing rocks at kids trying to swim, then just points and laughs at them. He's great. I love this guy. The kids then dial 911 and Joe gets revenge by jumping in the pool and ruining our hero's nice suit. I won't lie, I want a full comic of this weirdo just running around being a rascal, bullying helpless people. Just take my money. We have a big text adventure now called Shipwrecked Kids, and Kids has 2 D's because that's super cool. A lot of things in this first issue took its cues from the Dandy, and this story is no different. Dandy number 1 had a story about a family stranded after a plane crash, and here we have our characters shipwrecked and lost. We have a boy, a young girl, a man who was a ship's assistant cook, and a manly man who went by the name Big Bill Thompson. So manly. Thankfully as well, there are no red-headed women to cause bad luck. In this chapter of the story, we read all about the terrible storm that sinks the steam yacht named Swallow. It is Big Bill to the rescue that brings all our characters together on the raft that is now adrift. The raft is taken by a current to an island and is swept into a mysterious cave. As the raft floats through, they come to the dreaded Lake of Doom, where a whirlpool threatens to sink them. They all fight hard against the whirlpool's current and manage to escape into calmer waters, but things don't remain calm very long, as they are attacked by giant seagulls, and I think we can all agree, fuck seagulls. To defend his castaway mates, Big Bill shouts for everyone to get down as he explodes a half-full barrel of petrol to dispose of his birdie foes. This kills most of their attackers and badly burns the rest. Bill forgot one thing however, and that's that wood doesn't like being on fire, and now they have a burning raft. The young boy without hesitation jumps to put the flames out, making Big Bill very proud. He thinks to himself he can make some man for one man out of this young lad. This part of the story ends with the raft going further into the dark forest, as we are teased that next week they will face the monster of the lake. The best story so far for sure. It did not let up at any point. It was a constant out of the fire and into bigger fire. Part 10, Rip Van Wink and even more reading. Rip Van Winkle has finally woken up after 700 years of sleep in his cave. Now he's back and ready to rhyme, so much so that even next week's comic preview does it. Neat. This was an early comic that had a long run, lasting 10 years. In his first appearance, Rip wakes up and naturally he's hungry. He ends up accidentally shooting a man in the backside, but luckily the guy doesn't seem to mind. And before leaving, the man hands Rip a banana and a tin of beef. Not understanding the beef is in a can, Rip attempts to cook it over a fire while eating the banana without peeling it first. Unsurprisingly, he's not a fan of the taste. Things then proceed to get much worse when the can suddenly explodes, launching Rip high into the air. When he finally crashes back down, he decides it's safest to just retreat to his cave. This was only just alright. I am impressed though they managed to keep this premise going for 10 years. Now it's time to appeal to girls apparently, which is why My Dog Sandy was written. Girls love Lassie, well now they got Sandy. This is a story of a brave border collie and its cruel master. There is a part where poor Sandy gets savagely kicked about, but thankfully some locals intervene and Sandy manages to escape. It's not all doom and animal cruelty, as happily Sandy does find a friend, but there's a fair bit of cruelty before we get to that, as some brat school kids chase and throw rocks at our poor Sandy. I'll be honest, I'm not enjoying this tale so far. I don't understand what you women like about it, you weird monsters. Finally, Sandy is saved by a kind shepherd who scares the boys away. Next, very abruptly, Sandy on instinct manages to save the shepherd's sheep from an oncoming fire hydrant that just comes out of nowhere, so that's pretty good. The shepherd then is contemplating taking the dog home with him when suddenly the dog catcher appears, which is awfully convenient. The catcher informs the shepherd of Sandy's name and that he is about to be destroyed, but nah, not on this shepherd's watch. He tells the catcher, "Not today, buddy," and declares it's his dog for a happy ending. Hooray! Or is it? Next week's preview tells us there is trouble in paradise as Sandy faces a jealous sheepdog. Poor Sandy's life is full of pain because that's what you women like apparently. Well, I hope the one woman watching this video is very happy. You monster. Now it's time for the story of a boy, a clown, a cunning ape, and a circus. The tale is about little Jimmy Sampson, the nephew of a circus owner. Poor Jimmy has had a hard life with his father having died 6 years previously, and things aren't looking too good at the minute for his nice uncle. He does have another uncle, but unfortunately that one is a bit of a dick, so the dying one makes sure his circus will belong to the 10-year-old Jimmy after his death. What could possibly go wrong? A lot. Anyways, his bad Uncle Jules would often slap poor Jimmy around. This being the 30s, no one questioned that or the fact that Jimmy himself was being forced to perform in this circus from a very young age. His act was hopping around on springs. The story is very simple. The wheel, of course, gets stolen and Jimmy is against the clock to get it back so he can save the circus from his dastardly uncle, who, as closest living relative, would receive ownership when the nice uncle dies. This part of the story ends with Jimmy kicked out of the circus but planning very much to be back for the next performance. I jest a lot about having to read like an idiot, but all the stories have actually been alright. I see them and think, yuck, but you do kinda get sucked into them once you give them a chance, even begrudgingly. Issue 1 of the Beano is divided rather evenly between comics and prose stories, and they have in-between styles like our next section, Wild Boy of the Woods. Here we get a paragraph of prose under each picture. Unlike other comics in this format, Wild Boy doesn't get any speech bubbles. Again, ripping off Tarzan, Wild Boy does something unique. It names its hero Derek. What a terrible name, and offense very much intended for anyone called Derek. You people called Derek belong in a company that sells butter, making a good living, and not as a wild boy who has some amazing adventures. It just doesn't suit your name. Anyways, Wild Boy was rather popular in its day, running for 4 years and returning with a sequel after a 5-year break. It even had a weird 3-week run in 1949 where he tried to capture some birds for a zoo. In this origin story, Wild Boy was living alone in the wild before being discovered by an old hermit he calls Granddad. Very Dragon Ball, and not the only similarity we will see to Japanese media in issue 1. In this story, the hermit admits he found the Wild Boy 6 years ago and has decided before he dies he needs to go to the city and try to discover who Derek really is. Derek is sad to see the old coot leave, but goes about his day. This week's story then ends with Derek being captured and is accused of being a poacher. These guys should leave Wild Boy Derek alone and be protecting poor black beavers called Flash. A nice little adventure romp. Despite his name, I rather like Derek the Wild Boy of the Woods. Part 11, the final pages, Peanut and Tin Can Tommy. We have reached the end of our never-ending trip through the Beano #1. We have a modern-looking comic with a traditional use of captions underneath the drawings. Uncle Windbag. A windbag, for anyone who doesn't know, is someone always telling boring stories or says a lot of nothing. As was a very common theme in issue 1, we get some lovely animal abuse. Windbag tells his nephew a tall tale of hunting tigers. His nephew, not buying his nonsense, tiptoes away and returns with a fake tiger fur and easily scares his awful uncle. As an uncle myself who tells tall, boring tales, I have to say I found this comic offensive. I hope Monkey Tricks underneath can wash the bad taste out of my mouth from the last strip. Monkey Tricks was second place to be the Beano cover story, so let's see if it's any good. It's okay. Animals playing baseball and then they all gang up on this elephant for being too good or something. I don't know. It immediately reminds me of those amazing Cocoa Puff animated commercials. I think maybe a video on those could be something fun to do down the line, so let me know in the comments if you would be interested in me covering something like that. It's now Little Peanut's time to shine. This is his page of fun, which I'm sure you have already guessed was removed from the reprint. We get lots of jokes, a preview for Beano #2, and a letter from our controversial friend Peanut. This page would eventually evolve to being the letters page, with young readers often posting in their own jokes and letters for the junior editor to manage. It's final page time. Tin Can Tommy, the Clockwork Boy. Drawn by our favorite Italians, the Torelli brothers, my first reaction to reading this comic was, oh my god, it's Astro Boy, but 13 years earlier. A depressed father creates a robot as a replacement for his lost son. Classic Astro Boy. This Pinocchio tale though is a lot more comical than its Japanese cousin. I think what really sums up the tone is this amazing caption under frame 2. The professor's wife with tear-filled eyes looks startled when her husband cries, "We're sad because we've lost our son, but I'll try to make another one." Says it all really. The art in this is really beautiful and unique. The Torelli brothers were very talented. World War II unfortunately though ended their run on the Beano, and even after the war they never came back. It's hard to find much information about them online, and they are often referred to as the Dinelli brothers, though I believe that Torelli to be the correct name. I really like this comic, and like others in this issue, it is completely in rhyme. Well, if it's good enough for the 1930s, it's good enough for old Ashley, so if you would indulge me, I'm going to read the whole thing. Professor Lee is deep in the gloom while sounds of sobbing fill the room, for it had been a bitter blow when his son had died a year ago. The professor's wife with tear-filled eyes looks startled when her husband cries, "We're sad because we've lost our son, but I'll try to make another one." Still shedding tears, poor Mrs. Lee sees her husband grab his workroom key. Professor Lee is a clever man, and very soon he draws a plan. He shouts, "Ah yes, it can be done," and starts to build a clockwork sun. Some spring, some tin, and a screw or two, a splash of paint, and the job is through. Now see the professor show his wife their clockwork sun chock full of life. And Mr. Lee jumps as he thinks of the fun he'll have with Tommy, his tin can son. Was it just me, or did the rhyming in that last line just fall right off a cliff? That aside, I'm calling it. This was the best thing in Beano #1. It ended on a real high. Part 12, Conclusion. We did it, gang. We read all of Beano #1. There were some laughs, some cynical revision of history, and most of all, love. Obviously, a lot of this has aged, and not necessarily for the best, but there is still a lot to enjoy in issue 1, especially if you are some weirdo who inexplicably enjoys reading. Some standouts I didn't expect to like so much were Ping, Big Fat Joe, and the prose story The Shipwrecked Kids. Tin Can Tommy and Lord Snooty, also two very fine comics which I knew I was going to like, but I didn't realize just how much I would like Tommy. Tom Thumb was probably the only thing I didn't find any enjoyment in, but confidentially I went into that wanting to hate it, so perhaps that's on me. Maybe that's an old Ashley problem. Well, I think I said everything I wanted to say about Beano #1. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you next time for more Beano fun. Toodaloo, everybody! Hey, it's me again. I just finished saying a thing or two about a thing or two, and I want to thank everybody for watching and subscribing over the last 2 years. Beano number 1 was something I was saving for 1,000 subscribers, and I inexplicably got there months faster than I was expecting. I still plan to do a Q&A as well, so leave any questions you have down below to let old Ashley know. Bye bye!